Welcome to Deep Transformation, Self-Society Spirit. I'm Roger Walsh, and our co-host is John Dupuy. And with us today is Mark Fischler, who is many things, a professor of criminal justice at Plymouth State University. He's also the co-host of a podcast, Integral Justice Warrior, which explores justice perspectives and he's also a dedicated contemplative practitioner. So he brings a real heart to legal issues and also a deep perspective, an integrally informed perspective. And he's been a recurrent guest on our program, partly because he's a wonderful human being, but partly because in our troubled times, we really need a legal perspective from someone who is able to provide the legal view, but also do it from a big heart. So Mark, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us again.
Yeah, Mark, great having you back, brother.
And perhaps we could start with a big picture. We're in a very troubled global and national time. There's a lot going on in our contemporary political scene. And for some of us, it's deeply troubling. So perhaps we could just start with a big picture perspective, and you could just speak to what you see going on in our national politics at the moment.
And from a constitutional perspective also.
Thank you. And it's just, let me first say what an honor it is to be in both of your presence. Obviously, I've been on the show, but I'm also a big fan of your show and the wonderful contribution that you're making to our world. And so I'm grateful to be a part of that and to be able to listen to that. So to answer your question, I went and been reading a conservative former federal judge named Michael Luttig. And he has provided some really interesting perspectives on some things. And he wrote a long article in the Atlantic magazine about just the end of rule of law in our country. And there's just some profound quotes that I want to kind of share that President Trump has kind of put out there that kind of puts the things into perspective that Roger, you mentioned at the start. So when he was asked a few months ago, President Trump, don't you need to uphold the Constitution in your role as president? And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, that when you you have to swear an oath to uphold the Constitution when you are announced to be the next president of the United States, when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court swears you in. He said, I don't know. He said, I don't know. And then they asked him, well, doesn't every person in the United States deserve due process, which is a foundational principle under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution federally, and under the 14th Amendment to guarantee to all states that you afford due process and equal protection? And he said, I don't know.
And can I add that when I was a soldier and we were swore in, the first thing in that oath was to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States above obey the commander-in-chief or anything else. That was the first thing.
Right. Yeah. So you have this president who on the first day in his second term pardoned 1,200 who he called patriots, people that many folks would consider did an insurrection against the government of the United States, tried to usurp the 2020 election on January 6th, and he just pardoned them. And he's attempted to declare war on the prosecutors and the individuals that actually went after them and tried to hold them to account. And you go back in our history, you go to the Declaration of Independence, and you look at some of the language where, why did we declare independence, right? We declared because of a despotic king who was unruly and doing what they wanted to do. And we tried to create a constitution. Originally, we created the Articles of Confederation, but we tried to create a system that wouldn't give into that didn't have such centralized authority. And so one of the quotes from the Declaration in reference to King George, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be a ruler of the people. And that, there is resonance to, what's happening today. We have the FBI who went ahead and arrested a state court judge in Wisconsin under the idea of federal criminal charges that she was obstructing or impeding a proceeding before a department or agency, concealing an individual and preventing them from being discovered or arrested because they walked out of a side door as opposed to the main door. And by all accounts, there is no real evidence that the judge committed a federal crime, but they went ahead and did this. And then the Attorney General for the United States has said that our judges are deranged, that our judges believe that they're above the rule of law, and we must hold them to account. So there is this kind of attack on our judiciary in the process. And, these are really, really unprecedented acts in our history. And it's just incredible. We can talk about the mass deportations. We can talk about the war on the press. But, to really kind of look at this from a wider lens that you asked, Roger, these are really the hallmarks of an individual who sees the world from a really zero-sum game. That sees things from there are winners and losers, and wants to be on the side of winners. And however they see that, and it's interesting. I went back to Don Beck and Chris Cowan's book, Spiral Dynamics, and I think it's a 1996 book, and I think all of us, at least the three of us, have read this. And I was just, reading some things about how Trump looked at the world, and mind you, there's some things that there are some really important things that he's pointing out. I think there's some things where the left has really gone sideways, and that needs to be talked about so that we can understand why he's getting a lot of support. But to bring back home to what Roger said, I thought that this was really interesting. They were describing in Spiral Dynamics colors the color red and the perspective of red. And I think that
which is what, Mark?
Red is this perspective that like life is a jungle, that it's kind of us versus them. It's a perspective that there are winners and there are losers, and so it's really considered a pre-enlightenment perspective of reality.
So, Mark, let's clarify. You're talking about spiral dynamics, which is one map of adult development, and you're pointing to a particular stage within that. And the color red, you said, it's this stage map is often associated with colors, but this stage is an early stage, a pre-conventional stage.
Yes.
And so tell us more.
Yeah. So it's certainly a pre-enlightenment, science, pre-democratic rule, pre-rule of law. It's quite a winners and losers, quite authoritarian. It's quite controlling of the people and
accumulating power.
Yeah, it's really about power.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
And
there's
Mark, in a couple, just maybe another clarification, a couple of other maps, it's called self-centric,
yes.
and and also opportunistic. So maybe those words help clarify.
No, that's wonderful. So I just wanted to read a little passage
Please.
from it because I think it brings some clarity, at least to partially how I think President Trump sees things. And I'll read another quote that he said on Memorial Day that I think kind of reflects this. So, you know, this section is called Life is a Jungle. Simply put, living in red zone is like survival in the jungle. The weak will lose, and they deserve to because they're weak. Each person is an island, though they can draw together for strength when it is mutually useful. When no longer convenient, the red groups fragment and relationships are cast aside. Loyalty is transitory. It's a world of victims and predators, eaters and eaten. And, you know, if you follow President Trump on Truth Social, there is a great deal of rhetoric that reflects that. And I certainly don't want to say that his worldview just fits that, but it's a strong part of how he sees relationships. He sees enemies, and a great deal of what he's doing right now. And he promised this. This wasn't hidden. He promised this, that on day one, he was going to do retribution and go after those that he felt did him wrong. And he said there will be blood, and he promised that. And so, and we've seen that play out through whether it's going after law firms, universities, the press. We can talk about all those different pieces, but you know, just to kind of bring that quote home, you know, he said that on Memorial Day he sent out a message that kind of reflects this political tribalism. That happy Memorial Day to all, including the scum that spent the last 4 years trying to destroy our country. And he went on. But, you know, I think that kind of gives us a glimpse into his state of mind and why, you know, he doesn't necessarily honor what we describe as the rule of law. You know, the rule of law, you know, is this principle that we followed where all individuals and institutions are accountable to the law, and that there are equal protections for all of us, and we're all accountable to it. That's not how, based on the quote that I shared with you at the start, that's not really how President Trump is choosing to look at the reality of our situation, and to honor the rule of law. It's a hard-earned process. That these are stages of development where we've worked for hundreds of years to develop this, you know, our oldest democracy, where we have institutions that are built to honor the rule of law. And that rule of law, that idea is under attack, direct attack at this time in our country. And that is scary because we you know, we need this democratic foundation to move to deeper levels that are post-democratic, that are reflective of greater levels of interconnection, greater levels of the allowance of voices to be heard and to participate in a way where it's more inclusive than our democratic process even currently is. And so a lot is at stake, and I'll stop there and see where you want to go.
Yeah, can I just, John, first just kind of try to summarize what you're saying here, Mark, because it feels like you've given us so much, and I just like to orient what I hear you doing is putting the current political situation in the Trump administration and the values and beliefs that are operating there and underlie it in a developmental context. You're saying that these attitudes, these perspectives, these beliefs and values, and the resultant political actions are a reflection of a particular psychological developmental stage. and it's a relatively early pre-conventional stage. And we've given it several names: opportunistic, self-centric, power, motives, and that's what, if we look deeply enough, the fundamental psychological structure from which so much of what is disconcerting in the political arena is coming from, is a particular developmental stage. Does that feel right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. That's well said. And I want to be clear that there are other aspects and other stages that are being implemented and reflected in terms of what President Trump is trying to accomplish. But certainly in terms of his worldview, in terms of how he sees others that aren't in relation or don't agree with his point of view,
Yeah.
it really is this zero-sum game of winners and losers, and really that's how he speaks almost every day.
And when he was talking Memorial Day, and he referred to the prior administration or people that don't agree with him as scum, that's very redolent of Nazis, the way they talked about Jews. They were less than human. They were cockroaches. They were scum. They need to be done away with. And just to bring that language into the body politic and speak from that level, I mean, it's really, really frightening. And I think we become so used to these, like every day, some new abomination, that we get numb to it. It's just, oh, he's just being himself and ha ha or whatever. I don't. But it's really, really frightening. And it says a lot about what level of consciousness that Donald Trump comes from. And the shocker is it appeals to people.
Yeah, it's really the opposite of the I-thou relationship that Martin Buber talked about, that Dr. King quoted in his letter from the Birmingham jail. This, treating people as its. And when you do that, you dehumanize someone to the point where you can commit barbarous acts against those human souls. And it is quite scary. And it's a part of us, right? This idea, as you mentioned, Roger, I'm a teacher at a university, and I teach ethics part of the time, and constitutional law and criminal procedure. But when we look at criminal justice in terms of punishment, the one that is most reflexive of kind of like that basic nature is retribution. And that's what Trump talked about from day one, that he was going to commit retribution. And there is no rational thinking in relation to there is no utilitarian act that comes from retribution. It's just, you're supposed to get what I think you're supposed to get. It's very eye for an eye kind of idea. And that's really how he sees his so-called enemies. And it's really the opposite of a higher level of consciousness that sees the interconnection of all beings and the oneness that we share, the idea, as Dr. King talked about, that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that those notions are obsolete in the current administration. It's about our homeland. It's kind of more of a reflective of a older European notion that you take care of your particular people based on the confines of the landlines that were developed and the history of your particular people. And our nation has been built on something very different than that. We're built on ideas, on a purpose, and that's what we started with the Declaration of Independence. That's what we moved, and we were so moved by the Declaration of Independence, and then the Gettysburg Address, and then moved to higher purposes with Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which is an incredible document of the values of what it really truly means to be an American.
Yeah, Lincoln's second inaugural address too should be put in that list. And I want to bring up something that just just really shocked the hell out of me. No, it doesn't. It doesn't shock me, but it makes me worry. This recent trip that he did to the oil-rich states in the Middle East, and there is this thing in the Constitution called the emolument clause, foreign emolument clause, that says it is not legal for you to get titles or gifts from foreign leaders and foreign governments unless it's approved by Congress. You know, that's the one way you can get out. But he went over there with his basket open and said, just put in the cash. By the way, that airplane I saw, I really, really want that. That didn't just come to their minds. Oh, we love you so much. We're going to give you a $400 million airplane. No, that was like, bam. Oh, and it's a gift for the American people. And by the way, after I'm done, it'll go to the Trump library. You know, it'll follow me out of office. Seriously? He got 2 billion from, I think it was Qatar. I might be wrong, for his Bitcoin company or scheme that his family's doing. And then there's other amounts of money where they're building towers, these rich, oil-rich nations, golf courses, and all kind of things. We don't even know how much money that is. But shortly after that, Netanyahu came and visited Donald Trump at the White House, and I'm not a Netanyahu fan, but he completely said, nope, all the things that Netanyahu asked for, he said, I'm not going to do it. You can actually see how it's changed the foreign policy of the United States through all this cash that he's getting and gifts, and nobody's really saying much, you know?
Yeah. So let's ground. Let's ground. So we're really talking about corruption, and this is something that our founders were keenly aware of, and were tuned into, and wrote in Federalist Papers, and then wrote into our Constitution some different language, some of which you just mentioned, John, to kind of protect us from that. So just a couple of examples. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. Article 2 is about executive power. So this is about the president. And it said, it made an absolute ban on domestic gifts to the president. It says in Section 1, Part 1, he shall not receive any other emoluments from the U.S. And as you described, John, emoluments are mean for profit or gain from station, office, or employment. And so, boom, right there.
And he's using, this is a new precedent for America, using the office of president as a platform for personal gain and wealth.
Right, that's right.
That's exactly what the Constitution was trying to protect us from. And not only does he do these things, he doesn't do it like sneakily. He does it blatantly, openly, defies what the founding fathers said. And it's just, there it is. I'm above the law.
And so then there's the next Article 1, which is about Congress and congressional power, which, where is Congress in all of this is a very important question. But Article 1, Section 9 states, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without consent of Congress, accept of any present, emulet, office, or title of any kind from any king, prince, or foreign state. And he certainly got that gift without, congressional approval. And then about impeachment, this is really interesting. In Article 2, which talks about impeachment for high crimes and misdemeanors, they only name 2 crimes. One of them is treason, and then the other one is bribery. And, so bribery, so we're like, well, what's going on? You described the Qatari jet, we have the cryptocurrency investment, but also, this started in 2016, but, when people come to visit the United States, they're expected to stay at Trump Tower. Not just Trump, any of Trump's hotels or businesses. And so that's an expectation of doing business with the United States, is that you must do business with his private fortune. And so that, again, who are we? What is this? What's really going on here? And to your point, John, why aren't we talking about it? There are more examples too, you know, of that, you know, you can't, that the Department of Justice, to be hired now, you must answer certain political questions, which is unprecedented. You know, these are places that are supposed to be non-political for very, very serious, good reasons. But for example, it's been reported that you are asked, what did you think of January 6th? And basically, if you're not answering the question that these weren't great patriots who were trying to fix a rigged election, then, you know, you're not going to get into a position that is supposed to be a non-political position. You know,
Mark, this brings us into something that seems to underlie so much of what is powering this or orienting this administration, and that's Project 2025. And
yeah,
it's been in the news, and we've probably all heard of it, but it's only quite recently that I dug into this, and it was an eye-opener. So maybe you could you orient us to what exactly this document is?
Can I bring in just one more example that I think is very powerful? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But during the first Trump administration, his chief of staff for at least a couple of years was General Kelly, a four-star Marine general. And I think he's a man of honor. And I think I always felt good when he was there because there was an adult in the White House, you know, and he tried to keep things organized and keep Trump in check. Well, he recently said, and I think he's a very credible witness, he said that Trump had told him that he wanted generals like Hitler's general. So in other words, he wanted generals that were loyal to him, not to the Constitution, not to the country, not to anything else, but were loyal to him. And that's what he's been doing in all our major institutions, whether it's the CIA, intelligence, Department of Justice, FBI, firing anybody that has any, you know, commitment to the Constitution, the deep state of, you know, loyalty to our Constitution. And it's so blatant.
Right.
And this is one of the key tenets of Project 2025.
That's right.
All branches of the executive shall be loyal to the president. But Mark, why don't you give us an overview?
Yeah. So you know, that's what's called the unitary executive theory that he's put forward. So let me talk about Project 2025. It's a heritage foundation, which is a conservative organization that has provided public policy to Republican presidents and Congress, and for a long time. It's become much more shaped in Donald Trump's vision, although he spoke and tried to distance himself from it. But there was $22 million spent by the Heritage Foundation to develop the ideas that are the foundation around Project 2025. And so, you know, so what are some of the hallmark pieces of it? So one is about government, as Roger, you know, just said. And so it kind of proposes that the federal bureaucracy, including all independent agencies, including the Department of Justice, and that are, you know, quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial, that they report directly to the President of the United States, and that those individuals can all be fired and can therefore be hired as political appointees that are loyal to the President of the United States, as opposed to being loyal to Congress. And so you saw a threatened example. We're seeing Doge, and we're seeing thousands of government employees be fired. But in this, as an example, Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, had made some comments that were critical of President Trump's tariff policy, which he just, I think, backed out of with China today, back to normal, which is just embarrassing on so many levels, as the promise to all of his followers. And then we're basically back to what we had prior to him. But anyway, Powell gave some criticism, and Trump said, he talks out, I'm going to fire him. And you can't do that.
Not legally.
Because there is a Supreme Court decision called Humphrey's Executor from 1935, where it ruled that the U.S. Constitution allows, and so that was a situation where FDR did not like the rhetoric and the approach of a head of an economic arm of the government, and he tried to fire him. And so we're talking a different political party, different way, but it ruled that the Constitution allows Congress to enact laws. And so there is a law that limits the ability of the president to fire executive officials of independent agencies that are quasi-legislative or quasi-judicial. And so, this is a direct example of that. And so, we have, unless the Supreme Court of the United States overrules Humphrey's executor case, he can't do those kinds of things. He can't, this unitary executive theory is really, does not have any, it's not an original approach to the Constitution. It's not really the intention, even though we didn't necessarily at the founding of the Constitution have all of these agencies in the federal government. It certainly would not have been the intention if we read some of the language that I've already shared with you, and our approach to three branches of government to check the power of each branch of government. We moved away from being a king. And so, that's been our history. That's what's made us unique. So the idea of a unitary executive theory is just not what our founders were thinking at all. So,
and those laws were to limit the power of the presidency, not to give them more power. And I want to make a point there when you say the Heritage Foundation. Back in, the last several decades or 30 years since I've been paying attention to politics, the Heritage Foundation was a conservative group of scholars and thinkers, and they were pretty good. I didn't always agree with them, but sometimes I did. They had a lot of integrity, presenting the conservative point of view. But the fact that they've moved into this on all about, upholding the Constitution. Remember when Republican Party, that was important to them? So the fact that they produced this 2025 plan is shocking. What happened to the Heritage Foundation? What happened to what they've been saying for decades now?
Well, from their perspective, they would argue that this will streamline government. That means we have bloated agencies that do what they want. The Supreme Court theoretically has tried to rein that in with something called the major questions doctrine, which is the idea that a quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative agency or any kind of federal agency that's been created by the government, they have to enact and do things that they were asked to do, and they can't go beyond that. And so it's got to be directly related to them. And so I think they see this as a way of kind of streamlining government, allowing the president to directly implement their policies and ideas and not be kind of stuck in the mud by all these quasi agencies that are kind of doing their own thing. And so, there is, again, like I said at the beginning, there are some issues, that it does take a long time for a lot of things to get done, and sometimes that's good, for good reason, and sometimes it's not. And we do have, and certainly the size of our federal government, in comparison to our founding, is quite different. But in actuality, it's not that quite different from like the 1980s. And so there's this kind of notion that we have so much bigger and bigger than we were, but that's actually, not totally true. But it is true in relation to who we were a long time ago. But we've evolved, and
And there are a few more of us now too.
There's a lot more of us. Yeah, there's 330 million of us, as opposed to, when we founded, Philadelphia had like 4,000 people in it.
Amazing.
And so, it's quite a different republic. We were a rural nation. We weren't a nation that, we didn't have a navy. We didn't have all those things.
We weren't a great industrial power. We traded our natural resources for countries like Britain and France, who had the things, manufactured things that we didn't have.
So if we go back to Roger's question about Project 2025, there's kind of a couple of different, or 3 or 4 areas that they covered. So I just talked about government, and so we've seen them try to take a hammer to it. There's also, they have a focus on abortion and family, and so they have a desire. They have Trump has been on the record of saying, outlawing abortion on the federal level, I'm not for. But he has allowed, under RFK Jr., and they proposed this from the start, to look at the abortion pill,
I can never pronounce it either.
Yeah, mifepristone, I think, that they want to outlaw it and say that it's, take it from the market, using some kind of older federal laws that we haven't used, to have it not be mailed. And RFK has promised to look at the safety of it, and it's already been looked at, the safety of it. This has been used for a while, and it's been absolutely proven to be safe, as far as I understand it. And that, the abortion question is another issue that we can discuss, but they look at that they really want to limit the ability for people to have that. And they've proposed to collect greater data on abortions, and they've suggested that the Department of Health and Human Services, enforce and reflect a more biblical understanding of what marriage is, and when sex should obviously be appropriate. And so this would reflect more of values that are, more traditional.
The Christian nationalists, right wing,
which is different than the kind of authoritarian. And in some circles, this is kind of a next stage beyond the kind of authoritarian stuff that I was sharing that Trump's rhetoric reflects, but this reflects more traditional values, which is still pre-Enlightenment, still so kind of mythic-based, church-based, religious-based understanding, which is a strong part of Trump's base. He's a fabulous politician in the sense of understanding of who he speaks to, and what speaks to them. After he was shot, he spoke that he had a prophetic relationship with God, that he was the chosen one, and has shared that kind of language with those people who resonate with that kind of philosophy.
And that's
So
been characteristics of fascist dictators from the get-go, whether it was Mussolini or Adolf Hitler or Stalin, the chosen one, the only one that can lead us in the ways of righteousness. And that's just part of it. And we don't have the Republicans don't have a political party. They have a cult of the personality. They've moved completely away from what the Republican Party's conservatives, when I was growing up, stood for. And it's something else now. And it's about loyalty to one man.
which reflects the idea that of a third term too, which is outlawed.
Like he's 78 and he's kind of falling apart, but his ego is so big. He thinks he's going to, after he's 82, considering how he is now, he's going to continue to be president forever. I mean, it's so blatantly in the open, just contradicting and disobeying the Constitution. I mean, they don't even blush. I mean, there's no attempt to say, interpret it in a way that would make it seem constitutional. It just isn't. And they don't care. And that's a step towards dictatorship, authoritarian dictatorship. And I guess one of the questions that I was asking, preparing for this program, is why should it matter? I mean, dictatorships have their strong points. It's a lot more efficient in some ways. You can just say, do this, do that, do the other. And democracy is really messy. And I think Winston Churchill, and I'm just paraphrasing here, he said, democracy is a terrible form of governance, but it just happens to be better than anything else we've ever tried. So that messiness was built in to the Constitution, and they knew it was going to be messy. It was messy when they were writing the Constitution, but it was the process. They wanted to move us into a new level of democracy and freedom that very few humans had ever experienced before. And of course, our democracy grew. Women, couldn't vote. Slaves couldn't vote. There were a lot of, but as we matured as a nation, it kept expanding to include, everybody into the process. And so it wasn't, perfect at the beginning. And they realized that, but they knew they couldn't go farther than they could go, So,
yeah, what we're experiencing is really a direct attack on the principles of inclusivity, and so we see that with kind of an American first policy, a more isolationist way of relating with the world, an approach that really doesn't want to welcome immigrants, doesn't want to welcome people of different colors. I mean, Afrikaners in South Africa, who are the direct descendants of apartheid, are welcome.
Yeah.
But the brown folks and black folks and other folks don't seem to fit the bill, and so it's directly kind of counter to our philosophy of how we try to become more inclusive over time, which is a general direction. It certainly hasn't been perfect, and it certainly haven't been fully achieved in terms of our ability of providing equal protection to all beings in our country, and we need to see that, and so it's quite problematic, and it does require us to take a look at who we are.
Yeah, and I think in line with what you've been saying, Mark, one of the hallmarks of progress, both in individual maturation and in cultural evolution, is what's called the expanding circles of care. That as we mature, either as individuals or as nations, who we care for and embrace and include tends to increase, going from a egocentric to ethnocentric, my country, my world, my group, to a world-centric perspective. And And that you've talked about the Enlightenment at several steps. That's one of the hallmarks of the Enlightenment, that it became for the first time in history a universal or world concern, a concern for universal human rights, etc. And here we have a value system centered on a smaller group, a nationalist, us versus them again. And a couple of things you haven't mentioned here in terms of the inclusivity and care and concern is one of the key elements of Project 2025, which is now implemented or attempting to be implemented in the current big beautiful bill budget that's in progress at the moment, is slashing Medicare and Medicaid, which I just can't square with the Christian nationalist values. I mean, Jesus couldn't have went hoarse talking about the poor and the necessity of caring for them, but slashing Medicare and Medicaid, I just don't get it.
Roger and I and our team would like to thank you for your support and interest in the Deep Transformation Podcast and the ongoing conversation in which we pursue the love of truth, the love of beauty, and the love of goodness, the eternal virtues and verities. If you've been touched and moved by this adventure and journey, we would ask you to press the like button and hit subscribe. It is deeply appreciated and enables us to grow and increase our ability to contribute. Thank you.
And a couple of things you haven't mentioned here in terms of the inclusivity and care and concern is one of the key elements of Project 2025, which is now implemented or attempting to be implemented in the current big beautiful bill budget that's in progress at the moment, is slashing Medicare and Medicaid, which I just can't square with the Christian nationalist values. I mean, Jesus couldn't have went hoarse talking about the poor and the necessity of caring for them, but slashing Medicare and Medicaid, I just don't get it.
Yeah, there's kind of a form of fundamental Christianity that is kind of reflective of the idea of not about mercy, but more about accountability and picking yourself up by your own bootstraps and taking care of yourself and your family, and not relying on others. Some of the early Christians that came to the United States, to Plymouth Rock and that period really kind of reflected that. And you see that as a strong part of it. And so that rhetoric, Roger, that is so beautiful and kind of central to the essential teachings of Jesus. And I think back to your book, Essential Spirituality, and those sections of Christianity that connect with the other contemplative traditions. That rhetoric is not a part of the Christian fundamental movement. And it's there are basic notions. I was having lunch with a colleague yesterday who attended earlier in their life. They attended some Christian universities, and they were not allowed to date people of a different race or a different religion, and so those notions of inclusivity, the subjugation of the role of the woman, the responsibility of the man in those relations, those are kind of central to the rhetoric of the Christian movement of today that is foundational to the Republican Party, and not the rhetoric of our new Pope Leo or our former Pope Francis, who started his time by washing the feet of the poor and moving out of the palatial
Papal apartments.
Yeah,
he stayed in a guest house the whole time he was
right. Right. And so you hear the rhetoric of Leo today more in the Jesuit tradition of loving all beings and being inclusive to all beings. So there is a, there is a fundamental, there is a lot at stake, and there's a lot on the line in terms of our trajectory and where we're going, because the way I see it is that much of what is reflective of what the current Republican Party is putting out there is somewhat regressing us into values that we've had an opportunity to transcend, that we have to go beyond, and so I'm quite worried about it. But there, let me be clear, there bears a responsibility of the left and how they've chosen to handle things that has created cannon fodder.
Yeah, it's made it easy for the far right forces. They just made it easy.
Right. And so people that are kind of vulnerable and have, we have thousands of different ways of hearing things now with all different kinds of media sources. There's an assault on higher education in terms of, what I think is an assault on critical thinking, because it's quite easier when we have individuals. This isn't just about leftist, in my opinion. This isn't just about leftist stuff at universities. And let me tell you, they're right about that. They are quite right about that you better get in line and speaking in certain anti-racist ways at universities. I work at one. I've seen it. I've seen the alienation of my business colleagues. I've seen folks who have challenged some of the anti-racist rhetoric. Just again at lunch yesterday, someone was challenged some of the rhetoric that was put out by kind of someone who did a program on anti-racist stuff, and they were challenging it, and they were reported to the provost. There was a letter where they were included, and it was quite shocking. And I just learned about that yesterday. And so there is that, but I also believe that there is a very strong understanding of these individuals that were educated at elite universities, from J.D. Vance to President Trump, on down the line, who understand that a certain level of critical thinking, rational thinking, which leads to post-rational understanding and spiritual understanding of who we are as a people, that those are direct threats to having to embrace a mythic, authoritarian, might is right approach to reality, that an approach that's based on egoic, drill baby drill, based on monetary reward, making my life easier, as opposed to seeing my relationship to the earth, my relationship to all beings, my obligation to all beings. This is all, when we have these conversations in class that require critical, rational to post-rational thinking, that is directly contradicting what they want to accomplish, and they understand that. And so the assault on universities, I think, is more than just about DEI stuff, which is real and problematic. How we go about fixing some of that certainly doesn't have to be about cutting funding for for health organizations within, John Hopkins, who lost $800 million, and some of their research was on breastfeeding in Baltimore and mosquitoes in Mozambique that kind of can help populations. There's an attack on knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, and so, but we're really throwing the baby out of the bathwater with that. I'll stop and let you both respond.
Well, I just want to say that this attack on our great universities, Columbia, Harvard, is part of the fascist playbook. It's very anti-intellectual, and that goes for Stalin and, you know, allegedly left-wing types of totalitarianism. But they don't want, and I know professors, I have quite a few friends who are actually scared. They have to watch what they say, because if they step over the line, they might get reported, you know, by the students. And that's, my God, you know, attacking Harvard, right? That's probably the most famous symbolic symbol of higher education, maybe in the world, and to directly try to put them out of business because I forget what the because was.
Well, DEI.
Right.
And anti-Semitism were the excuses.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful you brought. Thank you both for bringing this up, because I had not appreciated until now that there was a deeper animus or animosity here that was actually, in part at least, based on a perception of rigorous intellectual thinking as being a threat to the values of what is essentially a mythic, largely a mythic or mythocentric worldview and value system based on, you know, a fundamental Christian perspective.
Just as an example, Roger, to bring home your point that you just said, the Smithsonian has had exhibits that have explained how that race is just a social construct, and that you know, that is not genetically based truth, and they are whitewashing this because it doesn't fit into the this kind
Dogma of the
dogma rhetoric,
yeah.
that there are inherent characteristics that make it so that some folks are more successful than others, that there are inherent characteristics that define people's capabilities. And so instead of instead of transcending that there is only one race, right, that they're actually trying to create a hierarchy of capabilities, which has been debunked by science.
Yeah, Mark, let me ask you about this, because this is very, I've never understood this race is purely a social construction. For me, it's up there with sex is purely a social construction. It's like there are genetic differences between races, but that doesn't mean there are different capabilities or capacities.
Right.
Gender is a choice. It's not biological.
Well, so, I mean, to an extent, right, Roger, that there are certainly different genetic aspects of beings, but there's one human race that we are, and there aren't these, you know, Gregory Thomas. We were at the conference together, the three of us at I believe the same table, where Gregory was kind of talking about how people would try to define African Americans in this way where their hair was different, their bodies were different, their brains were different. There were, you know, early scientists that were trying to show how the brain of the African American was more like a monkey than it was other human beings. And those things are just not the case. And so the rhetoric, I guess I want to clarify that, yes, there are genetic differences, but they aren't the kind that define us in terms of our capabilities. They don't make us not one, you know, human race. They're not that kind of defining that they are trying to make it out to be, if that makes more sense.
And inbreeding is not a good thing. I think one of the good things about the United States, we're a bunch of mutts. You know, when you get dogs, they're too purebred. They just have all these issues and psychological and physical issues. And when the breeds are mixed, like with my dear dog, you know, she's a Labra Pit with a little bulldog, I think, thrown in there. I had her DNA test done, and she's just a wonderful dog. And Americans, we're a nation of mutts, you know, and we do exchange, and it's made us a great nation. We have obviously had some problems getting it together, but to be a mutt is not a bad thing. And if you just have like the Habsburgs in Austrian Empire, they only would breed with other people of their family and the royalty. You couldn't marry a common or anybody below your status. And you look at the later photographs of them, they were all distorted. Their facial features and everything, because they just inbred and inbred and inbred. And the Native American tribes invited people from outside to become tribe members, like escaped slaves and white people that wanted to, you know, adopt the Native American style. And that they knew intuitively that the tribe would be stronger if they were mixed, which is like completely contrary to right-wing, far right-wing doctrine, dogma, you know,
Right.
the
Right.
chosen people, not the chosen people, but the superior race.
I wonder if we don't have here an example of the excess leading to reaction, and the attempt to deny racial differences made it very easy for an attack, a swing back in the other direction to emphasize differences. And you know, maybe the reality is, you know, all of the above, everything that you've both said, that there are, yes, there's one human race, there are individual races within that, and it's, in some ways it seems almost by the point, because surely our value should be to give everyone of any skin color or gender or whatever equal opportunity and equal chance to be as full and complete a human being as possible.
That's absolutely the point. And I think that all education should be paid for. What a better investment in our country. And if you're hardworking and smart enough to go to Harvard or Columbia, boom, go. That's investment in our country, and that's going to help our country be greater as far as you want to go. And if that's not your thing, you know, you can study to be a plumber or electrician or something else, or a farmer, but that access has to be open. The opportunity has to be open. And and I don't think, I mean, speaking of black people, I mean, there have been, I mean, my heroes, right? And the music I play have often been black. And I don't want to make African Americanism or whatever that is go away. And I've heard certain speakers say that. I value the culture. I value what it's given us in spiritually and politically, and the sense of justice and the soulfulness that you find so much in the black churches that has spread out through the common culture. That's been incredibly rewarding. And most of my, you know, I'd say about 60–70% of my musical heroes, and I am a musician and I play a lot of music, I play the blues, have all been, you know, African American, and they bring a certain taste. Oh, and one time when we were at a conference and we really connected for the first time. I mean, we've seen each other before. I think we were standing in line to eat or something, and you told me this, and I just thought about it today, and it really moved me. You said, "You like Jews," and I went, "Yeah, I do," you know. And I was like, I don't know why you said, what made you say that, but it was like, it's very true. You know, I really do like Jews, and not all Jews are great. And I'm not saying they're the chosen people or they're not the devil's spawn. They're just an amazing group of people who I've got so much for. And I just like what interacting with Jews has given me. And I just like them. You know, I'm a pro-Semite, if there's such a word. And, you know, there it is.
Well, you know, I think it's to kind of reshape this a little bit. I think it's almost safer to talk about things from a cultural perspective that just as an example, if you want to talk about Jews, I grew up, I have Jewish heritage, but my dad is an Ashkenazi. My dad, who's passed, was an Ashkenazi side, and my mother is a Sephardic, which means it was from Spain, Mediterranean, along those lines. And they're really different cultures. Going to family gatherings and et cetera, and on both sides
How
were
interesting.
extraordinary, different experiences, really foreign from each other. That it just night and day.
And I think you're pointing to something important here, Mark, and that is, when we talk broadly in stereotypic ways, we don't really do much service to anyone.
Right. Yeah. And I think that goes back to this idea of inherent capabilities of the so-called race, a certain race, and that's kind of Hitler language. That's that kind of separated.
It's a very slippery slope for sure.
Yeah.
It has to be treated, as with so many of these topics, they need to be treated with great care and compassion and discernment.
And respect.
Respect,
Yeah.
respect, yeah. I wonder if we could switch topics a little here, and that is one of the things that's been mentioned, but only in passing several times, is what's now being called the authoritarian slide. And so, Mark, I wonder if you could speak to this, maybe just by starting off by defining authoritarianism, and then pointing to some of the movements that you see that have happened in this administration, which really may be moving in that direction.
Yeah, well, authoritarianism is kind of the idea that there is one authority who gets to define what we do, why we do, who we are, who's right, who's wrong, and so it's a serious centralized process of and where there are the people that are on the good side, and then there are the enemies, and it's kind of they become outlaws, and then you can do what you want to those kinds of people. And so we are seeing some of those kinds of behaviors from the administration. So you can think back just on day one when he pardoned all of the January 6th folks, and they kind of declared war on the people that prosecuted them, and then he went after the law firms, where some of our most prestigious law firms, one who did pro bono work on behalf of special counsel Jack Smith, that was looking into Trump's actions, went after that law firm to bar them from federal contracts, and demanded that they do work on behalf of what Trump considers appropriate, and to not work with those that he doesn't consider appropriate. And these are in direct contravention to the First Amendment to the United States, and which allows for viewpoint diversity, and also it's in contravention to our due process rights, our procedural due process rights to not be punished for actions that without due process, which is what he did with his executive order. And it also is in contravention to substantive due process rights, which allows one to live the career and do the work that they want to do. We have that commitment in the Constitution to allow us to live the life that we want to live, as long as it's within the rules of the United States. And so, that was a kind of authoritarian attack on our law firms in our country, and some of them caved. And frankly, it's shameful because, lawyers, whether we love them or not, are guardians, as one judge said, of the rule of law. And so when lawyers are afraid to stand up, and really that's the environment that's kind of being created, is that if you do stand up, we're going to sue you, we're going to bring you to court. And if you don't have a lot of money and you aren't a Harvard or a major law firm with a huge history in the United States, and even some of them caved, but a lot of them haven't. And so, those are some of the hallmarks of that. It's the idea that I can basically do what I want. So we saw
Yeah,
that
when
again. Yeah.
Judge Mercer, the one that was presided over the felony cases Donald Trump went through, where he was convicted by a jury of his peers of 34 felonies, and he refused to sentence him. And I thought he was a pretty good guy. And he just, well, if you're really rich and powerful and you're going to be running for president, you're really above the law. And justice is not blind. It's if you've got connections and power. As he said, I could walk down Main Street in New York City and kill somebody, and my followers wouldn't care. And he said that a long time ago, but it's just shameful. I mean, we have this guy running one of his main objects. One of his main objects is to become president so he wouldn't go to prison. That's kind of a new one, new precedent in American history. So yeah, people caving. And, it's easy to say that, oh, they're cowards and everything. But when you feel that pressure on yourself, your livelihood, your freedom, and also are at risk, how do you handle that? Do you put ethics and morality and the love of democracy and freedom and the people of our country first? Or is it just, I can't do this? That's a question each person has to answer for themselves, their own conscience. But
Well, it's, you're looking in your background, behind you, you have Dr. King and you have
yeah,
the Beatles, who took a stand to not play, um, in Southern venues that
it didn't
were
allow blacks
segregated.
to be in there.
And you see the moral authority of Dr. King, who, spoke, as Roger said earlier, at a world-centric level, certainly maybe even more of a cosmocentric level of understanding of our interconnection as beings, and literally on the last day that he lived, he foresaw his death soon, and said doesn't matter. This is the right move. This is the right.
He was a dead man walking. This picture is a picture of him and arriving at Memphis airport the day before he was assassinated. And there are three pictures. This is one of the pictures, and there are two other ones that were taken there. But this was, like I said, he predicted he was going to be killed in his last sermon, and he was assassinated the next day. So this is a very, very, very important picture. And it's a really interesting story how I came to have it, but this is a one-off. There's no other. This was done by the original photographer, and it's signed. It's museum stuff, and and I lent it to the African American Museum where I live, and they use it. I just think it's a incredible photograph, and the guy in the background, oh, there you can't see him. Interesting enough, he was working for the FBI, so you have a Judas figure, right there in the background. And yeah, and he'd already won the Nobel Peace Prize. He could have kicked back and written books and been a great, whatever, but he led from the front because he could do no other. That was
right. That level of moral conviction. And really that's what, and that last speech they call is, I've been to the mountaintop, and those last 3 minutes are chilling for anyone that chooses to watch it, because he does foresee that he's about to die.
And we need Martin now more than ever. It's not like, oh, we don't need that, what he was talking about. We need it more than ever. And
I would say that we need Martin's level of moral awareness.
yeah,
Need that level.
Beautiful. Yeah,
We
yeah,
need
that's
that.
beautiful, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to emphasize what you're saying, that we can't rely on others to do this for us. It's going to require a lot of us, as you said, John, courage. A lot of us to be willing to stand up, and it's probably not going to be easy.
No, and it may be dangerous. It may it may be that, but it's we've got to contemplate what's at stake, and because this is the assault on democracy that we are experiencing, is also kind of an assault on a spiritual understanding of the deeper nature of our existence and our responsibility, our our work to repair the earth for all beings, Tikkun Olam, the Bodhisattva vow, Jesus's sermons of responsibility to your brother, to the whore, to all beings. These are foundational to living a meaningful life, a life that's well lived, and so this to me, the laws, the Declaration of Independence, those ideas are kind of woven within an idea of equality and dignity for all beings. But there's a deeper spiritual understanding of what that really means. And so there is a direct assault on that. There is the idea that there is an other. There is an idea that the others are its, that they're scum, that they are less worthy. And there's an idea that I must just benefit myself, the idea of just drill, baby, drill, at what cost, without any context. And in terms of, Roger, what you said earlier about Medicare and Medicaid, serving the poor, serving the needy, serving those, what is our obligation to each other as a people? And I think we, through our spiritual work and understanding, know what that is, and it's essential to be there for others. It's essential because they are us and we are them, and so much is on the line beyond democracy.
Yeah, the sacredness of every individual, every individual, like the Hindus say, namaste, I honor the divinity within you. And fascism doesn't go for that,
Yeah, I really appreciate you both of you bringing in this level of reflection on the fundamental values and aspirations that animate at its best democracy and a care for people, and that yes, democracy is under threat, but also deeper values. That's what you're both pointing to here, that there are really fundamental values about the worth of each human being, our obligation and our call to treat each other with care and love and respect and dignity, and to, yes, justice needs to be done, and justice and mercy in balance.
Yes, no, it's beautifully said, and so there is much work to do, and to go back to that there are always partial truths from an integral perspective, and President Trump has made some really important points that the Democratic Party has not related very well to the working class, has not been able to connect on a level with those that aren't in technology, aren't at the elite coasts of the Golden Coasts and the East Coast, and has just you know been lock, stock, and barrel over Trump's commercial, won the election, during football games, they're with the transgender stuff, and that's not anything against being transgender, but the lock, stock nature of not even reflecting on whether it's fair, inherent notions of fairness, couldn't even talk about the inherent notions of fairness of having transgender athletes that were male competing in female sports.
Sure.
Wouldn't talk about it, and it's so obvious, right? And it was just easy stuff for him to hit out of the ballpark and make fun of and show how we're not relating.
Right.
You know,
Fodder for fascist takeover. And the whole LGBTQ thing, I mean, the left has really erred in that you can't take ideas that are way developmentally beyond what people, normal people in the street, and try to shove it down their throats because you're so sure it's right. And I have no problem with that. But, working class people, Christians, they're not ready for that. And so when you try to force this stuff down their throats and they're not ready for it, you push them toward this authoritarian thing. And if you want me to call you by a different pronoun or that, sure, brother, sister, whatever. It's all good. But don't try to force it down people. And it's just made it so easy for us to get to the point where we're about to lose our democracy,
and this immigration stuff, it's there. I have friends that live in LA, and there are Jeff Salzman promoted a tweet on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now that showed the complexity of the issue that the Democratic Party ignored for a while, that some of these communities, there's beautiful things that are happening with some of our undocumented folks that are doing incredible work and not committing crimes. And there are also other communities that have been devastated and decimated in the process. And again, it just couldn't be talked about. And we haven't had that. And so, what I see is that we're really, some of the left, if we go back to the spiral, reflects some of the kind of postmodern green values, and that we're really there is an opportunity here with all that's at stake to maybe catapult possibly that the leading edge, instead of being from that postmodern perspective, becomes from a metamodern or integral perspective that actually sees the partial perspectives and is able to make greater sense of them, able to speak to all spectrums of consciousness and relate with beings in ways that are authentic and not alienating. If you can't, if it's said based on your handlers that you can only go on The View and you can't go on Joe Rogan, then we have a problem. And so I think there is this small window of possibility, that we could maybe move to a higher stage of understanding in terms of at least the leading edge being more populated with folks that see the partial truths, that see the depth, that see the spiritual issues in play. I know Rob Smith from Integral Life has talked about the Great Release and those kinds of possibilities. but it's scary. This is a very scary moment because all we've been describing in many ways are the possibility of true regression, and we're seeing some of it. The courts have held up to kind of smack down all these kind of executive orders that are illegal because these acts really need to be coming from Congress, or they're First Amendment violations, et cetera, as I described. But, the courts don't enforce the laws. So
Right.
you need a cooperative executive, to do that. And we saw in one of the immigration cases that they took a long time to cooperate before they brought that man back to the United States. I think it was last Sunday that he was finally brought back after the Supreme Court of the United States had ruled months ago that the lower court did the right thing and you need to bring him back. And
And they're trying to prosecute him now because he drove some undocumented immigrants from one workplace to another, and they're trying to throw him in jail for that act. So one thing I'd like to get in, I think I've been using ChatGPT for a while, and I have just keep deepening conversation. And yes, it's not perfect, but it's unlike any technology we ever have. So I'd recommend everyone to have AI to summarize the Project 2025, to summarize the big, beautiful bill. What are the main points you're trying to get through here? What's included? And you can read that, and get down to it. And maybe you think, oh, this is a great idea. And you want to call your senator, please vote for this, or you may not. And in that case, you have to make your voice known. They pit big, beautiful bill when it was voted on at night in the Congress. One day, nobody had a chance to read 1,000 pages. Just, rubber stamp, Congress, Trump said so they did. But now the Senate is starting to have problems because the content is actually starting to come out. And we need to educate ourselves and fact check everything. And don't take my word for it. If something I'm saying doesn't feel real, that we have the technology now where we can really look into these things and see what we need to know to be citizens, to be human beings, to act in a way that's responsible, compassionate, wise, and strong.
So part of our response here, and I'm looking for what the responses that are called for from us all are, is what you're saying, John, is education, and you've also said, John, courage. Both of you have talked to the necessity of courage at this time, and involvement. And there's a lot talked about right now about the studies, comparative studies across societies on the percentage of a population which needs to be deeply involved in a social movement to have effect. And the research suggests around at least 3 or 4% of the population has to be actively involved in a movement. So if we are it seems like we're called to work towards preserving our democracy, towards preserving the underlying values, and I really thank you both for emphasizing those. It's going to take all of us. And so as we're coming towards the end of our time, but Mark, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, to go back to John's point, Jefferson, if you ever go to Monticello, you can look down and you can see the University of Virginia. And he was also created West Point. Jefferson read Plato and Socrates probably when he was 15 at William and Mary, read it in ancient Greek. But he saw their criticism of democracy. And I think his answer to them, because let's not forget, a democracy killed Socrates, but his answer to that was that if we create an educated public, then an educated citizenry, then we'll have folks that are wise enough and to be critical thinkers enough to do the fact checking, to do the research, to contribute to the greater good of our society. And so I want to reemphasize the importance of fact checking, of being a critical thinker, and really, and you don't have to go to school to do it. One of my favorite books is a book by Ivan Illich called Deschooling Society. And it's a great approach where, we can do intergenerational learning outside of a classroom that gives you grades, etc. So, I think that's important. I think for those of us that want to take to the streets or want to protest and speak out, I think there's a way to do it.
Yeah.
We'll go back to John's hero and my hero, and I'm sure Roger, he's one of yours too, but Dr. King. In the letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King described when he was criticized by the clergyman of Birmingham, Alabama. He was criticized for creating violence in the city. And so he answered it. And part of the way he answered it was by explaining the 4 steps of nonviolence that his followers followed before they ever participated in a march or a sit-in at a restaurant or hotel. And so those 4 steps include, collecting the facts. And so, which is a part of critical thinking. You better know what's really going on. You better be open to the possibility that you could be wrong. You better not have an agenda without understanding what are the facts. And, as an attorney in the old days when I was a public defender, I remember one of my mentors said to me, facts win cases, Mark. You better get your facts straight and be clear with that. So I emphasize that. That's 1. 2, after you get your facts clear, you can enter into negotiation. And that's an open-hearted way of speaking to those in power that, after you've gathered the facts that you believe an injustice has been done, that you speak to them and you don't take things personally, and you enter with curiosity and love and realization of their dignity and worth as beings. And if that doesn't go well, then you take the next step of which he describes basically as self-purification. And what he means by self-purification is that you enter into contemplation. You see as Jesus saw on the cross, that you forgive them for they know not what they've done, that you don't take anything personally, that you realize that those actions of others are not about them. And you see the universality, you see the oneness of all beings, and you enter into that state of reality so that if you do have to withstand blows, that you understand that it's not personal, and you understand the greater picture of the situation. And after that, you enter into direct action. After you self-purified, you've entered that state of awareness, then you take direct action. And so for those of us that are outraged, I just ask that, you take these 4 basic steps for nonviolent action, and we understand the situation, and we understand that, for those of us that are feeling like our democracy is under threat by certain populations, that we see them as our brothers and sisters, that I love you just as much as I love any other being. And so, if we can enter that understanding, that state of reality, then I believe that, karmically we can contribute to a higher purpose and create the energy necessary to take us to the next steps of the spectrum of consciousness. And that's going to take all of your listeners to come together and beyond with that understanding to achieve what I'm talking about. And so that was what was on my mind, Roger.
Yeah, and I got two little practical things I want to throw in there, because I think we're moving into a time of great public protest, and there will be people that will try to make it violent, and exactly what Trump wants, so he can federalize the National Guard, send in the troops, and he's the strong man saving the country. So if you're at a demonstration, somebody's starting to do something violent, there's two things you can do. First, you could surround him or her so they can't do it, or you can all sit down so the person that's trying to inspire the violence is seen. So those are two practical ways of making sure that our protests are not manipulated. These radical crazy, it's violent. Trump was saying that people were spitting on the police and the soldiers, and if they spit, we're going to hit, just trying to build this up, and there's no evidence that ever happened. So he wants this to happen. So we have to be really clear about our nonviolence, and that violence will just hurt the cause of democracy and freedom and justice that we want. So be wise, wise as serpents, harmless as doves, Jesus said. So don't get brought into the violence in the street and destroying property or hurting human beings. Just don't do it, and have a plan how to stop it if it happens, because it will happen. There will be people that are there to stir things up, provocateurs, and we can't let them take over.
And you said you had a second point, John?
Yeah, just the two practical things. You can either sit down when it starts getting violent, or you could surround the person that's doing it and just, no, this is not going to happen. So, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah. Well, this has been an extraordinarily rich and important and sometimes painful conversation, but it feels like one of the conversations that needs to be had this time. Mark, I want to thank you so much for throwing out the key points from the letter from a Birmingham jail. I've never read that, but now I really want to. Sounds like a very, very important document, and particularly appropriate and called for in our times. And thank you, Mark, for the perspective you bring. It's really beautiful to have someone who's so well informed about the legal issues of our time, and yet who holds the whole thing and possible confrontations, etc., within a heart of care and compassion. So thank you very much.
And the ethical and psychological aspects of this whole thing. You do that so well, and I'm deeply grateful.
Well, I'm grateful to you both, and it's truly an honor to be in your presence and to try to contribute a little bit to making this world a little bit more of a sane place with a heart felt awareness all around.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for being with us. We super appreciate you guys, and
thank you to our manager, Heidi Mitchell, and to our tech whiz, Vanessa Santos, the team that makes this possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Heidi. You've been great to communicate the last few weeks, and your sensitivity and awareness has been deeply appreciated on my part.